Overall, Dragonflight's main story campaign was solid. I think the villains are neat and the cutscenes are cool, but there's always been something off with WoW's story. It seems like all of the pieces are there, but they aren't together. It seems like there are always lore explanations and important events happening outside of the game. So strap in and let's talk about World of Warcraft's storytelling problem. All right, future shizzle here. There's one point I didn't bring up that in retrospective after editing the video, I feel like I need to bring up. And that's the fact that WoW's story is as old as Warcraft itself, which is very old. Very, very old. It's gone through countless amounts of writers, directors, all that other shit. So in defense of Blizzard, because I feel like in this video it's very lopsided, there's no like, hey, what about, you know, their perspective? In defense of Blizzard, to be fair, it cannot be easy trying to write a story that is essentially built on a Jenga tower of lore. All right, so keep that in mind. I really wish to put this in the original script. Other than that, we'll get back to the original video. All right, what do I mean when I talk about important events happening outside of the game? Well, here's an example. In the lead up from Wrath to Kata, the Horde would experience a little change in management. You see, Thrall went off to become a shaman, leaving Garrosh in charge of the Horde. Well, one Cairn Bloodhoof, leader of the Tauren, didn't exactly like that too much, so he challenged Garrosh to a Mako Ra, which is a fight to the death. And Cairn gets killed. Sounds very straightforward, simple, and frankly a bit compelling. Like, how would that impact the Horde's relationship with each other? This huge lore event happens inside the Shattering book, not in the actual game. So when players who didn't read the book log into Kata and realize, oh shit, Cairn's dead, they're a bit confused. They have to go out of their way outside of the game to find that missing piece of the story. Now, that's one way WoW's story feels fragmented, and there are certainly many other examples of story being cut from the game in the lead up to BFA before the Storm was released, chronicling important events like Sylvanas' own internal thoughts and motivations. Sylvanas is a very controversial character because of her being perceived as needlessly evil. There's also this scene of her and her two sisters where she almost has them assassinated, which happens in a webcomic. Okay, one last example, and bear with me on this one. It's another Sylvanas example. At the end of Wrath of the Lich King, Sylvanas was the star of Edge of Night, a short story where she throws herself off of Icecrown after the Lich King's death. It's here that she finds out her deeds have landed herself in hell. It's in this hell where she meets the Lich King's Valkyr. She forms a pact with them to have one of them essentially take her spot in hell, essentially making her immortal so long as she's Valkyr and giving her a new motive, which is to never again see hell by becoming permanently immortal. Now, you could already see how important this would become, and it's another example of the story being told outside of the game. However, this was recontextualized in Shadowlands. With the new lore, this is actually where she makes her first pact with the Shadowlands main antagonist, the Jailer. Perfect opportunity to correct the mistake, show us this as a cutscene in-game, give us the extra context, maybe do what you did with Illidan and Legion, have us play as her, and they didn't do that. They just recontextualize it. They just said, hey, this is where she met the Jailer, and they leave it at that. All of this is further evidence that for a while now, WoW's story has been split up into pieces, with chunks being purposefully left out of the game. And look at all these short stories, comics, these books, they're great. But the issue again is that this is essentially becoming required reading to understand the story in the game. In my opinion, I believe that these extra forms of story should serve to expand on characters that maybe don't get the limelight in the game. A perfect example of this would be in Shadowlands' prequel book, Shadows Rising. This book gives us a really good character arc with Talanji and Zakan the Troll, otherwise known as Zappy Boy. Overall, great little story, great book, and I left enjoying these characters a bit more. But I feel like that's all these books should be. They should just be forgiving characters time in the spotlight. Now, there is one more thing I want to bring up. Sometimes the story... My dog is here. Hi. Really scared me there. I'm almost done with this, girl. I promise. I'll give you a belly rub after, I promise. Dogs. Now, there's one more thing that I want to bring up. Sometimes the story that is in the game ends up being split or fragmented. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take Dragonflight, for example, and spoilers for the Valdrakken Renown campaign. So there is a pivotal cutscene where Ysera returns from Shadowlands, which is huge for the overall story of not just Dragonflight, but WoW as a whole. This cutscene is wonderfully animated, has some of the best voice acting in the game, and is overall just a great cutscene with some really important lore implications. That is locked behind reputation. Why isn't this part of the main campaign? Why is it locked behind a rep? Don't get me wrong, I like that there is an actual reputation story campaign. I think that's an amazing step forward, but this is way too important to lock behind reputation. Every player who cares about the story needs to see this. It will 100% matter for the rest of Dragonflight, but instead of roping it in with the rest of the campaign, they locked it behind a reputation where no player would reasonably expect such a key story element to be. They did a similar thing in Shadowlands. There was a key cutscene between Anduin and Sylvanas that was locked behind the only optional wing of Torghast. What if I don't do the twisting corridors? How am I supposed to know? By doing this, you're forcing the player to go outside of the game to find story that's already in the game. Look, locking main story content behind optional content doesn't just mess with the accessibility of the story, but it makes it feel more disjointed and fractured. Why not just include this in the main campaign? You know, when every player is expecting to see them? Alright, look, as I said, I think Dragonflight is a solid story, and after the wonderful preach reviews done at Blizzard HQ, they seem to know this is an issue. So instead of leaving this video on a negative note, I'm going to say this. Despite the many issues I have with this game's storytelling, given the number of changes that have made Dragonflight great so far, I am more optimistic about WoW's story in the future, and I have a bit more confidence in the dev team I know cares deeply about the game they are making. Thank you so much for watching. Consider watching this video on screen. Thanks again, and take care.